When we hear the word Vikings, what is one of the first words that comes to our mind? Of course, it's Norway. After all, the land of the midnight sun has had a wild history, but that has not kept the country away from success. Hello and welcome to our channel. Today we're going to talk about the history of Norway and how the country came to be the way it is today. Modern Norway barely has a 200-year history, but the Nordic countries have a much longer past. From the first people to colonize this once glaciated continent to the present day, when engineering and technology have transformed this world, it has been quite a journey. The Gulf Stream's warming influence helped the area now known as Norway emerge from the previous ice age. Around 12,000 BC, humans were able to settle on the formerly glacial region. It wasn't until after the end of the last ice age, around 7000 BC, that temperatures were consistently warm enough for people to settle in Norway. The original Norwegians caught fish and hunted a variety of animals, including elk, deer, seals, and whales. Agriculture was brought to Norway sometime after 3000 BC. Stone was used until about 1500 BC, when farmers started switching to bronze for their tools and weapons. Iron was widely used in Norway after 500 BC. Roughly around the year 200 AD, a writing system called runes was adopted. Affluence for these new farming towns was generated by the fertile land around the Oslo Fjord, Trondheimsfjord, Lake Misum near Lillehammer, and Jæren near Stavanger. The Sami are descended from Uralic speakers who migrated to the Arctic and intermarried with the local population. During the Iron Age, technology advanced enough to make better implements, making farming simpler and more efficient. As the population expanded due to the bountiful harvests, new land was made available for settlement. A brand new social order formed. The extended family unit known as a clan was formed when sons married and stayed in the same home. Members of the same clan were shielded from the violence of other clans by this social arrangement. When disagreements developed, they were settled at a thing, a holy site where all the free men in the area could congregate and decide on appropriate punishments for wrongdoing. Fines, usually in the form of food, were a common form of punishment for lesser offenses. The term thing is still in use today to describe a council meeting room. Stortinget, the Norwegian word for parliament, literally means the big thing in English. Starting in the 1st century AD, when the Roman Empire was still developing, it began to have a noticeable impact on global culture. The Norwegians developed the runic alphabet and started exchanging furs and skins for foreign luxuries. During the migration period, from around 400 to 550, when other Germanic tribes migrated northward and local farmers desired protection, some of the most powerful farmers became chieftains, and their influence grew. Norwegian Vikings were notorious raiders that terrorized Western Europe in the 9th century, plundering Scotland, England, Ireland, and France. They even made it to Muslim-controlled southern Spain on one raid. The Norwegians, however, were more than just raiders. The Hebrides became their home islands west of Scotland, the Orkney and Shetland Islands too. The Isle of Man was also originally colonized by Norwegians between England and Ireland. But in the 9th century, Norway was split up into different kingdoms. The unification of Norway was more drawn out than in any of the other Scandinavian countries. In the late 9th century, Harald Fairhair anointed himself King of Norway after establishing his authority over the western coast. Then, Eric Bloodaxe came along after him and reigned from 900 to 935. Hakon I replaced Olav as King of Norway and ruled from 935 to 960. He made an unsuccessful effort to bring Christianity to Norway. King Olaf I of Norway, who reigned from 995 to 1000, is credited with converting the country's coastal regions to Christianity. Olaf Haraldsson, who reigned from 1015 to 1030, is considered the first true monarch of all of Norway. He is also credited with converting the Norwegian interior to Christianity. Magnus, Olaf's son, was crowned King of Norway after his father's death. In 1047, Harald Hardrada took over as his successor. Harald Hardrada attempted to seize power in England in 1066, but he perished in Yorkshire in the Stamford Bridge battle. The army led by Harald was defeated. That was the end of England's political influence in Norway. The Norwegian social structure has three distinct strata. The lowest class consisted of thralls or slaves. Slavery was unimaginably deplorable because slaves were forced to perform the dirtiest and most disagreeable tasks. Those who were not enslaved were called freemen. Depending on how much land he held, a freeman may be either very wealthy or very impoverished. They were subjugated to the jarls and nobles above them. In the 11th century, Norway became a Christian nation. A man named Olav Tryggvason anointed himself king of Norway in 995. The southeast regions were in the hands of the Danish. Harald Hardrada died in 1066, although his descendants remained monarchs of Norway until 1130. When Sigurd the Crusader died, however, a long period of civil conflicts afflicted Norway. The Hanseatic League, a confederation of German merchants, quickly rose to power on the North and Baltic Seas in the 13th century. The League swiftly outpaced the Scandinavians and posed a threat of territorial expansion into the area and its commercial routes. Unification was seen by many in Scandinavia as the ideal strategy for dealing with Germany's growing military might. The unified nation would be much stronger and better able to fend off the southern incursions. Naturally, nobody could agree on what shape this might take, as is the case with all political affairs. The best demonstration of strength would be to merge the countries into one, but this was met with fierce opposition by Swedish aristocrats who were afraid of losing their own power in the process. The long period of political alliances and warfare between the Scandinavian countries began in 1380 when Olaf Håkonsson inherited the thrones of Norway and Denmark and founded a union. Norway, Denmark, and Sweden formed the Kalmar Union 17 years after the treaty. Despite Margaret and centralized policies which favored Denmark due to its larger population, Norway was too economically weak to withdraw from the union. Margaret helped the Hanseatic merchants establish a mini-state within the city of Bergen, further undermining Norway's influence. In the years after Sweden declared its independence in the 1520s, Norway remained a relatively insignificant member of the Union. As a result, Denmark and Norway merged to form a single country under Danish control. Despite agreeing at first not to introduce Protestantism to Norway, Frederick I of Denmark, a supporter of Martin Luther's Reformation, went ahead and did so in 1529. Olaf Engelbrektsson rallied a small group of Catholics in Norway to defy the government, but they were ultimately unsuccessful. The Danish written language and Lutheranism were introduced by Christian III, who also reduced Norway to the status of a Danish province and kept Norwegian dialects alive. Norway experienced the Reformation in the 1530s. After the Danes adopted Lutheranism, the Norwegians did the same. The development of Norway's commercial sector occurred throughout the 16th, 17th, and 18th centuries. Cities in Norway expanded throughout the early 1700s. After a devastating fire in 1624, the Danish king Christian ordered the city of Oslo to be rebuilt and named Christiania in his honor. In 1924, the city reverted back to using its original name, Oslo. Norway was a major exporter of fish, lumber, iron ore, and copper in the 17th century. It was in the 18th century that ironworks were established in southern Norway, where they produced a wide variety of iron wares. The size of the Norwegian commercial fleet also expanded significantly. A population count in 1769 revealed that there were 728,000 people living in Norway. Bergen, with its population of 14,000, was the most populous city. But we shouldn't get too excited about the expansion of business and industry. The vast majority of Norwegians in the 18th century earned their living as farmers or fishermen. The Swedish military invaded Denmark in 1813. Norway was ceded to Sweden by Denmark in January of 1814. Nonetheless, a portion of the Norwegian population actively opposed the change. They followed the lead of the Crown Prince Christian Frederick. Then he gathered everyone together. The Constitution of Norway was drafted by the Norwegian Assembly on May 17, 1814. Frederick the Christian won the throne. Norway, however, was invaded by the Swedes in July of 1814. Christian Frederick abdicated, and the Swedish king was accepted as ruler by the Norwegians. Yet he conceded and said he would abide by the constitution. Norway had a lot of independence, even if the Swedish king was in charge of foreign policy. The Norwegian nobility was abolished in 1821, and the Bank of Norway was established the following year. The loss of the British lumber market to Canada in 1815 contributed to Norway's economic decline in the years that followed. But beginning in the 1840s, progress was made. There was a heyday for Norwegian agriculture and the lumber industry in the latter half of the 19th century. By the turn of the century, Norway had the world's third largest merchant fleet, behind only the United States and Britain. Additionally, Norway experienced a dramatic increase in its population during the 19th century. Only 883,000 before the turn of the century, it grew to 2,240,000 by its close. Even though many Norwegians moved to the United States in the late 19th century, that was still the case. In the meantime, the 19th century saw a rise in Norwegian nationalism. By 1882, things had reached a critical point. The Storting, the Norwegian parliament, established a law requiring all members of the cabinet to take part in parliamentary debates. 3 times the law was passed by the Storting, but each time King Oscar II of Sweden vetoed it. Norway's citizens ultimately opted to impeach the whole government. After being impeached and found guilty in 1884, they were removed from office. As a result, the king eventually capitulated. Norway's transition to parliamentary democracy in that year was a turning point in the country's history. The right to vote was extended to all adult males in the United States in 1898, with the exception of those receiving poor relief. The Norwegians started pushing for their own consular service back in 1891. The Swedes, though, flatly declined. Early in 1905, talks were held but eventually stalled. It was a one-off move by the Storting. It legalized the establishment of consular services in Norway. The bill was vetoed by the Swedish king. The government of Norway subsequently resigned. The king was unable to establish a new administration. Since the Swedish king had not appointed a new government by June 1905, Christian Mickelson, a Swedish politician, contended that the king had essentially abdicated. He had ceased operating in his capacity as King of Norway. Since the king failed to serve as a Norwegian king, the Storting pronounced the union with Sweden to be dissolved. Voters in a referendum held on August 13, 1905, overwhelmingly supported Norway's decision to declare independence. An agreement had been negotiated with the Swedes by September 23, 1905. On October 26, 1905, the Swedish king publicly abdicated any claim to the throne of Norway. On November 12 to 13, 1905, a vote decided who would serve as Norway's head of state. A monarchy was chosen by the Norwegian people. Denmark's Prince Karl is now King Haakon VII. Voting rights for women were first extended to municipal elections in 1907 and later to federal elections in 1913. Norwegian independence was followed by economic growth. There was a surge in hydroelectric production, and in 1915, people began enjoying a 10-hour workday. Norway took no sides in World War I. However, because of unrestricted German submarine warfare, almost 2,000 Norwegian men lost their lives and half of their fleet was sunk. Unemployment soared in Norway during the 1920s and 1930s. Nonetheless, Norway was hit by the Great Depression less severely than other European countries. Norway suffered some more in the Second World War, but the country would later become part of NATO and since then hasn't faced any security issues. In the 70s, Norway explored its vast reserves of oil and gas, and its economy started to boom. Since then, the country has been on an upward trajectory, and even the recent pandemic was not able to stifle the economy as it did all over Europe. So that is all the time we had today, folks. Hope you enjoyed this video. Do not forget to subscribe to our channel and to hit the bell icon on your way out. See you all next time.